Hello and welcome. You are watching Lockdown TV. This is the pop-up news and discussion program from Unheard. We have been bringing you interesting and varied big brains and thinkers across this lockdown period, from scientists to politicians to writers. We are trying to make use of this opportunity where everyone is stuck at home and doing quite a lot of thinking, it seems like, to try and work out what the big questions are and what sort of world we are going to inherit at the end of it. Joining us today down the line from Athens. Hello, Yanis. You're still muted, I think, Yanis. You got to unmute yourself.
One should have learned much faster than one has during lockdown. Anyway, so it's very good to be in your program. Thank you for the invitation.
So let me just introduce you to people who aren't sure. You're a little bit blurry, so they might not recognize you, but you are an economist, writer, politician in the more recent years, both with Syriza in the 2015 era and now a member of parliament in Athens for your own political party. Is that a fair summary, Yanis?
Please.
Well, let me start straight away with one particular thing which a lot of our viewers will be interested in, which is Brexit. This is the word we've been talking about, nothing else for the past 3 years, until suddenly in the last 2 months we don't mention it at all. You have had a change of heart on this. You were campaigning, or you were arguing for Remain initially on the grounds, as I remember, that we should be staying in to reform it radically. You now think that it was correct to leave. What changed your mind?
Facts, my dear Watson, facts. But I don't really believe that I've changed my mind. And you be the judge of it. Let me remind you, or actually tell those who have no obligation to know what I've been up to in 2016, that I campaigned vigorously against Brexit. Now, let me say this, that if there was a time machine and I could be put back into 2016, even with the knowledge that I have now and the views that I have now, and which we will discuss, I would still campaign against Brexit, because that was a political decision. Brexit, as I said recently, and I was quoted in the Daily Telegraph, and I think this is the reason why you're asking me these questions. I said in the Daily Telegraph that I now think that the British were correct to choose Brexit for all the wrong reasons, however. I still think that if we were back in 2016, it would be worthwhile campaigning against Brexit, because the reasons put forward for Brexit were so phony and so toxic. There was an air of xenophobia. There's no doubt about that. Remember the posters with the Turks arriving on your doorstep. These remarkable claims and appalling claims about the billions and millions that it would be spent on the National Health Service, that would be a windfall as a result of leaving the EU. All that was, on the day after the referendum, I came out and said, well, we lost. Now it's over. Now we have to embrace Brexit, because we are Democrats. I may have a disagreement with you. We take it to the people. We have a free and fair exchange of views, and the people decide. We lost, so just wear it. The idea of having a second referendum by which to annul the first referendum on the basis that the people who voted in favor of Brexit were, in that direction. No, interrupt me. I like being interrupted.
Well, I confess that I actually came to see you in 2016 when you were doing your, I think it was a talk about your book. And I remember thinking at the time, your words were full of antipathy to the European Union. And then you ended it by saying that we should vote Remain. And now we chose to leave.
Well, I did say that. Look, firstly, there is no contradiction whatsoever. Loathing the system of government in your country, let's say, and being a patriot, inflicting wounds upon the nation. So I spent in, not because I want the dissolution of Greece, but because I want a different way of governing Greece. So what democracy-free zone, it is an oligarchy, it's a cartel, it's all this. Why can't I believe that and at the same time think, well, to stay in the disintegrating European Union and for those who are outside? Having said all that,
2015, which you were so much the figurehead of with Greece, and the no referendum, where the country of Greece was totally kind of steamrollered by the central EU powers. I think that set the tone for a lot of the stuff that happened afterwards, including the Brexit referendum. You know, and if you believe in the power of the nation state and a people to be self-governing, which you talk about, surely, you know, in the furnace of those moments in 2015, that's when you should have thought, you know, the European Union is not that.
No, but you confuse a commitment to democracy with a commitment to the nation state. I believe that yes, we fought long and hard to have democracy in Britain, in Greece, in Germany, and that is something we should celebrate. But that does not stop us from acknowledging the fact that for 43 years, Britain became intermeshed politically, economically, industrially, in terms of standards, in terms of university research programs and so on, with this thing called European Union. And to say that, well, maybe we should have done it better, or definitely we should have done it very differently. But the cost of disintegration is going to be just gigantic for the people who are mostly against this European Union, people in Yorkshire and people in Clacton-on-Sea, for instance, whom I think in the end are going to suffer as a result of Brexit. But having said that, you know, I respect the view of those who voted for Brexit. I cannot stand the Remainers who look down upon, you know, the opposite side and who try to vilify them in order to justify their loss. And the fact that, let's face it, the Remain side shot itself in the foot with all those appalling, statistical predictions of Armageddon coming and so on. Every time, you know, Tony Blair or David Cameron or George Osborne spoke in favor of remaining, I thought, oh my God, we're losing the battle here. And you know, you made a point which I think which is very important. I think you said that you accused me, but in the nicest possible way, of articulating a nuanced argument, of not treating the audience like, you know, they are children, not infantilizing them, saying, look, it's a complicated thing. There are these arguments, there are those arguments. Why can't we have a sophisticated conversation?
Maybe though just to broaden this, what would you say to the idea that the reason since 2015 you haven't had more electoral success? I mean, you now are heading up, as I understand it, a group of 9 representatives in the Greek Parliament, so that's not a non-insignificant electoral success. But the DM25 project didn't get any MEPs, and now, you know, Bernie Sanders has not succeeded, Jeremy Corbyn has not succeeded. Is it not possible to look at the sort of populist left and say, well, they got the economics right in terms of what people wanted, but they always found the cultural aspect distasteful, basically. The sense that people wanted a nation state, hesitations about immigration, all of those things that have been winning votes, the populist left just can't get on board with. And there's one country, which is Denmark, which has now had a great success with its social democrats by embracing quite a hardline immigration policy. Maybe Denmark is the model for your populist left.
Well, hardly, but let me answer in 2 ways. Well, firstly, look, it's really very easy to become popular by embracing xenophobia, especially at a time of deflationary forces running through the economy, depleting the life prospects of many people. The easiest thing you can do during a moment of crisis is get on a soapbox and say, I'm going to make you proud again. I'm going to kick out the Turks, the Greeks, the Danes, the Brits, whatever. Huh? It's really so easy to do, and so difficult to articulate a nuanced term. To say that, you know, if you can't beat them, join them, that, you know, racism light is the solution, as it is in Denmark. Well, it is. The Danish Social Democrats are particularly racist in the way that they have embraced that awful xenophobia that now has wrecked what has been a gem of a cultural milieu in Denmark. I would rather lose every single electoral fight than become a Danish Social Democrat. And you can see now, for instance, that, you know, once you start giving in and giving up some basic humanist principles in order to accomplish electoral success, effectively, you may be in government, but you're not in power, because the agenda takes you over, and then you become just a mirror image of the rightist opposition. The second point I want to make about electoral failure. Okay, in our case, the M25, we started, we ran across Europe a new movement without any money. We had 50,000 euros across Europe. This is the fact that we gathered 1,500,000 votes. Okay, it may be insignificant in the grander scheme of things, but in relation to the kind of support we had, it was not bad. And that we entered Greek parliament. In any case, I am a conviction politician. I prefer to lose than to say things I don't believe in. So, guilty as charged. But on the point that you made about, you mentioned Sanders and you mentioned Corbyn. No, the only reason why Sanders and Corbyn and people like myself in 2015, when I was in government, why we lost, and there's no doubt that we are losers, is because we were completely and utterly undermined by our own political parties. I mean, I was undermined by my own prime minister and my own, we had an agreement I was going to go and do X, and then suddenly the rag was pulled from under my feet. You saw what happened with Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn was constantly undermined within the Labour Party. We now have the report. We can check that now. It's past history. Bernie Sanders. The reason why, the only man that could actually beat Donald Trump fair and square has been undermined by the Democratic Party that prefers to keep Donald Trump in the White House than to even contemplate the idea of Bernie Sanders. So, that's a problem with the progressives. The progressives, we are notorious at undermining or being undermined within our own political parties. It just reminds me of the opening scene in Life of Brian, the Judean People's Front versus the Liberation Front of Judea. Yeah, we're doomed to failure because, we're trying to change the world.
I'm trying to offer you a recipe for more success here, Yanis. I don't think it needs to be.
I don't care about pointless success.
Let me make the...
Remember Mussolini? He was a socialist. And then he became a powerful dictator by embracing racism and turning, just completely toxic. That's success. I don't want that success.
What is so, to my ears, I hear someone, when you talk about the patronizing nature of the kind of establishment to Brexit voters, I think you've got it so right. And then you start using the word racism like that, and it sounds, once again, suddenly you flip into this kind of, you talked about treating voters like adults and not patronizing them. Maybe that most of these voters are not racist. They're not bad. They just felt like, democracy, it works best at a national level. And they felt they had cultural insecurities and so on, which are perfectly legitimate. Maybe if the left was a little bit less sort of allergic to those issues and didn't rush to the idea that it was all racism, they would be more successful without abandoning their principles.
You're absolutely right, and I agree with you, but I'm not guilty as charged. I didn't accuse the voters who voted for Brexit. Even in the United States, I go to the United States and say, stop vilifying the people who voted for Donald Trump. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to say Donald Trump is racist. It's not going to stop me from saying that Dominic Cummings deployed racism like a weapon by having those posters of the Turks arriving. I have no doubt that the vast majority of the people who voted for Brexit, the vast majority, or for Donald Trump, are not racist. They're fed up. They're fed up with the elites. They are asking themselves now, whom should I vote for, or what should I vote for in order to to upset who votes. Even here in Greece, I say this, and some of my colleagues in our party, Mera25, they look at me behind. No one should be abandoned to the toxic racist narrative of those political parties and campaigns. That's not to say that those political parties and campaigns are not deploying racism.
So and now it looks like we have another one in 2020, which is this pandemic. And a lot of these political rules are going to be rewritten after this. Already in the UK and elsewhere, we've seen, rules about how much money is available to spend have been, discarded entirely. Destruction of this potential?
No, I believe that every crisis has a therapeutic potential and a destructive potential. And it's up to us, citizens, to, even the Tories in Britain are now acknowledging the importance of the National Health Service. And also they are retreating from the mantra I remember very strongly after 1981, 1982, what happened after that crisis. You're too young to remember, but because everything was privatized, nationalized, even by after the refloating of Wall Street and of capital, but socialism for the very few, because let's say fear, and afloat in financial markets. We see it now. Look at what's happening today. You have, capitalism has managed to achieve that. And at the same time, while there is a catastrophe here, we know how to make money on the way down and on the way up, and now things have stabilized with some volatility that is very good for finances. So there's a huge disconnect between the world of money and the real world in which people suffer and worry about their health, their income, their children, and so on and so forth. And there's no guarantee that the fact that there's been this suspension both of capitalism on the one hand and the neoliberal mantra that everything that is private is glorious and everything that is public has to be privatized, that doesn't mean that it's going to last. Once they feel that they have the upper hand again, unless there is some progressive movement that creates circumstances similar to Roosevelt's New Deal in 1933. That is the only thing that can save us, really. But that took a political project. Where is it now?
So just to get a sense of what the actual situation is in Greece now, are you under some sort of lockdown? What is the day-to-day reality for Greek people right now?
Well, the Greek conservative government, we have a Tory government here, they were much faster in reacting to the virus than Boris Johnson. So we had lockdown 10 days before you did, and it was very effective. So, kudos to the government for having minimized the victims. We've only had 140 deaths. We were lucky, of course, because the Balkans generally has fared well, even though they haven't had the same kind of reaction. The lockdown is severe, which means, of course, the other side of the same coin is an economy that was wrecked by a decade-long depression. We were still in depression when the coronavirus hit. Now is beyond repair without some massive investment project. We are facing a recession of at least 13, 15, 18%. We're going to have a gigantic budget deficit, which should be okay. I mean, you shouldn't worry about your deficit because you should have a deficit. The problem is, we don't have the Bank of England. We don't have a central bank to print money to fund the government.
Because you're in the EU.
We're in the EU. Not so much in the EU, in the European Monetary Union, in the Euro. So the Troika is going to come next year and say, as Greece begins to recover a little bit.
The conversation about some of these lockdown measures and, that people look necessary in that country. And I just wonder, do you sense any of that in Greece? You sound very in favor of those restrictions. I just wonder, what will it do? And they begin to feel like they've been told by yet more powerful people with computer models that they have to radically change and shut.
I don't think that the Swedish model was successful. If you look at relative death rates in Stockholm and Copenhagen, it's 3 times. No questions asked. I don't think even Sweden would have tried that. So the consensus here in Greece is that it was the right thing to do. The criticism, the second phase, how do you go from the first phase of the blind, our party's position is that we need massive tests. We need to test people and to test them repeatedly in order to ascertain who can get out there relatively safely and who should remain indoors until they're cleared of the virus. That takes planning, takes money, and I'm afraid we don't have it. The Germans have it to a very large extent. The German model seems to be working because they conduct hundreds of thousands of tests every week. This, to me, seems the responsible way of proceeding because, if you look at the data from the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918 to 1920, you see that this trade-off between lockdown on the one hand and economic collapse on the other doesn't really hold up to the evidence, in the light of evidence. If you look at American cities that did not have a lockdown between 1918 and 1920 or removed the lockdown quickly, those were the ones that within the next 4 or 5 years did not do well economically either because of the second wave. So it's the second wave that we should worry about.
So how worried are you, though? I mean, for Greece, it would seem intuitively like Greece, which is so dependent on this huge tourist season, will there be a tourist season this summer? Will there be a tourist season next summer? How is Greece's tourist industry going to recover from this if they're trying to suppress the virus entirely? And there are all sorts of people like Sweden where half the population has had it.
But look, tourism has received a major blow across the world. The last figures that I looked at mentioned $2.6 trillion lost already for the tourist industry worldwide. So if you are the problem is with Greece that we are like a monoculture. We have an economy which is heavily dependent on tourism and very little else. So when tourism is hit, so the resilience of the Greek economy has been utterly depleted after 10 years of the Euro crisis, because tourism was the only thing left standing after all the cutbacks and the austerity programs and so on, and the closures of factories, even of agriculture. So we are in dire straits. We are in deep trouble. But it's not just that we are not going to be letting the tourists in. The tourists are not going to be coming, even if we let them in. Firstly, because they're worried. Secondly, because think of how many Brits and Germans and French simply don't have the money to go on holidays these days after lockdown. Or the airlines. How long, you saw British Airways fire 12,000 people today. You see what's happening with all the other airlines. The airlines are telling us that it will take 3 or 4 years before they build up capacity again. So even if we open our doors, tourists will not be coming. So we need to. Yeah.
Is there a positive side to this, though? I mean, clearly it's going to be economically disastrous, but do you see that we can make a better world somehow out of the ruins of the system that we now find ourselves in?
Well, if you want a cliche, I'll give it to you. There's always a silver lining. The Second World War begot the National Health Service, the welfare state. If you go centuries back, the Black Death effectively created commercialization and increased wages because of the reduction in the supply of labor. So there's always a silver lining. What our job should be, I think, because this year I turned 60, so it has had an effect of concentrating my mind on what really matters. And I think harm minimization is the number one priority now. This is not a time for grand ideologies to be, sharpening their knives, seeing the coronavirus as a fantastic opportunity to triumph. This is the time to minimize harm. And I have no doubt that those who suffer not because of the virus, but because of the economic effects of the virus will be a multiple of those who suffered from the coronavirus itself. That doesn't mean that we should disregard the coronavirus victims. I have friends who have suffered it and who tell me that, don't let anyone fool you that this is just another flu. It's not another flu. It is a debilitating, awful disease. But at the same time, in this country, we're going to have millions of people who go hungry, even though we have defeated the virus so far.
Mm-hmm. So do you think it comes down to a kind of philosophical choice, though, still between, how much risk a country should be prepared to tolerate, and ultimately how many potential deaths should they be prepared to tolerate for one reason, in order to protect a world and a way of life and an economy on the other? Does it come down to that? And is that kind of difficult conversation actually happening?
Well, you're talking to an economist who always believes that every economic decision is also a philosophical and ethical decision. Even, whether you buy a tub of yogurt is a philosophical and ethical decision. So yes, the answer to your question is yes. The conversation is taking place. But as you know, even, moving away from the coronavirus, if you were the Minister of Public Roads and you had to decide whether you spend a few million quid on a particular, junction that where, one person dies on average every 6 weeks or so, you have to value life. You have to come up with the answer to how much money is that life worth spending on in order to save it. It's a question that nobody should have to face, but it's one that you face as a policymaker all the time. So we make all these decisions. The worst thing is that sometimes we make those decisions without realizing that we are making these calculations. The ethical calculus is always under the surface of all political decisions.
So you don't think there'll be protests in Greece in 9 months from now or a year from now against the lockdown measures or against the corona policy?
Well, if our political party can help it, there will be massive protests, not against the lockdown, but against the cynicism with which this government is using the crisis in order to shield the oligarchy and to expose to the economic ramifications of this crisis the majority. This, I think, is what we are going to try to mobilize against. Not so much the lockdown, but can I give you a simple example? The legacy of this crisis has been many non-performing loans, mortgages that are not being serviced because people just can't afford to pay their mortgages. So, half of the mortgages are in the red, as we say in Greece, right? They are not performing. Now, a couple of months before the coronavirus hit, the government introduced a bill that allows banks to securitize these mortgages and sell them on to vulture funds from the United States, primarily, from New Jersey and the great state of Delaware, right? And to motivate those funds to buy the non-performing loans from the books of the banks, they've given them a guarantee of public monies of about 12 billion, which is a lot of money by Greek standards, given the situation here. And we have been calling upon them to freeze that law, to pass an emergency bill in Parliament, because we know that there will be no mortgage repayments because people can't afford it. So now that those vulture funds will have the right in 3 months to go to the Greek government, force the Greek government to borrow from the troika of lenders, because the Greek government is bankrupt, right? 12 billion to give to funds, not even to the banks. So the banks will not benefit. The people out there will not benefit. Only the funds from the United States will benefit. Now, this is something that we want to mobilize people, and I'm sure we will, because people are sick and tired of governments that look after the oligarchy. And in the midst of this disaster, both medical disaster and economic disaster, they always find ways of looking after the oligarchs without frontiers.
Yanis, let me take you back for my final question to the UK. We have just seen installed a new leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer. Is your view that he is a cold-blooded technocrat and is not going to deliver, or is he actually going to be a wonderfully successful leader who will take those Corbynite ideas and make them into a reality that people will vote for?
Well, I wish Keir very, very well. I wish him the best. I hope he proves to be a great leader who manages to unite the Labour Party and the people of Britain. My concern is twofold, and it's totally dispassionate. I'm not taking any sides. First, he was on the wrong side of the Brexit argument in terms of supporting a second referendum. Even though as I said, I do not regret opposing Brexit, and I would do it again. The second referendum campaign was highly disrespectful to the majority who voted for Brexit. And Keir Starmer was part of that. And I think that he played a role. I mean, I'm sure he did it because, of a deeply held belief that he was doing the right thing. But he pushed Jeremy Corbyn and the whole Labour Party to adopt the second referendum idea, which in the end was the reasons why the Labour Party was ruined in the last election. It was not the manifesto. It was not, in my view, Jeremy Corbyn, despite the vilification. It was that wrong move. And Keir Starmer, effectively the architect of the wrong move that led to the ruin of the Labour Party, now must lead the Labour Party out of the doldrums. This looks difficult.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I thought there was going to be a second reason.
Oh, yes. The second point I want to say is because I've watched Keir Starmer. I have this hunch, and I hope I'm proven wrong, that he will win every argument in Parliament against Boris Johnson with no effect whatsoever outside, in the realm of public opinion. Boris Johnson is perfectly capable of being the bumbling person that he is in Parliament and making outrageous noises and so on, and losing the argument, technically speaking, to Keir Starmer every single time, without that carrying outside the chamber to deliver benefits for the Labour Party.
Well, that was fascinating, Yanis. Thank you. I hope we'll get a chance to check in 9 months or so and see which of these various predictions has or not taken place. Have a great rest of the week, and thank you for your time talking to us today.
Well, thank you very much, Stu.
That was Yanis Varoufakis talking to us live from Athens. You've been watching Lockdown TV, a really interesting discussion, and we've got Professor Hendrik Streeck tomorrow from the University of Bonn, who will be telling us about his new study into the prevalence of antibodies against the coronavirus in the German population. So we look forward to seeing what he has to say about that. See you tomorrow.